challenging like a medieval regime, know the university as an enemy, and I can say science as an enemy. That's why all the time try to make Islamic university, not an independent university or academic university. And during 2 or 3 years after Women Life Freedom movement, you can find some big challenge in university. For example, death penalty is one of the punishment in Iran, and it's very normal, and Iran is, after China, is one of the biggest country with execution. And in university last year, when the government started to execute young protester in university, a student activist start to say stop death penalty and say death penalty is against human rights. A student activists stand with the women activists, labor activists, and in 1st of May, many student activists was arrested, and it shows how is important and really connected to society and other movement, women movement and labor movement.
Thanks. I mean, now that you're talking about different approaches and orientation, I want to ask you, how do you see the feminism activism in Iran universities? I mean, we see this women life liberty or women life freedom all over the place, shot by people loudly. Do you think women, or at the university or also in the society, are leading this movement, and how feminism is accepted as a political, social approach in the universities?
As you see in the video, most of the time I was one female student activist and other was my friend, all of them was men. But now it's completely different. You can hear their voice, women voice, clearly more than men. Not just in university, even in a street. And more than 600 of a student and professor who was expelled last year was women. It shows they are more affected. Not men was part of that, but the government was angry about women. That's why more of the people who, most of the student and professor who got fired was women. But, you know, in our children book, all the time, we see a good woman as a mother. So, and the government all the time promote this face, woman who working as a guilty woman. So that's why in university, we need feminism. For if a woman want have a job, need to husband permission. And many other rules that are against women. But women go to university, and we have many feminists in Iran, despite of this government, despite of this education. And I think, yes, we need feminists, and many students in Iran now believe to feminists. Maybe they say, no, I am not a feminist. But because one of my crime was promote feminism in university. So it's people think it's really a guilty action, but they do as a feminist.
Now, I mean, I'm gonna wrap it up with another question. You said women, girls, young females are going still to universities. If you look at the statistics, the proportion of female students at the universities in Iran are quite high, sometimes higher than Western countries. How do you comment on this? I mean, girls go to the universities, young female go to the universities, but they don't end up starting a career. They don't contribute to the economy. The economic contribution is like as low as like 30% of female are just economically active in Iran. And
How much?
13, I think.
13.
My last statistic
Yes,
is
yes,
13% of females in Iran are economically active,
Yes.
like that they have a job and contribute to economy. So how do you comment on this? They enter, they are not active when it comes to activism. You were like the lonely female there, or other females. They don't they are not active or proactive. They don't get into economy when it comes to finding a job. And still, we have quite big propaganda saying that Iran has the biggest proportion of females entering the higher education in Iran. How do you comment on this?
Just 12% of member of faculty are women in Iran. So it's a good view. Just 12% are professor or member of university. And for bachelor, yes, many women go to university for bachelor, but because of traditional expectation in society, and especially about situation of women who should be a mother, who should be a housewife. So for master and PhD, it's significantly declined. That's why when the government want to say we have many students, show the bachelor number, but in the other way, no, it's really disappointed.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm gonna get back to you with like wrap-up questions. Now I want to move to Steve and ask him, okay, how did student activism as a student politician you are start for you? How did you get engaged with this?
Is it on? Yeah. Okay. I think that's a pretty pretty difficult question because I haven't really thought about that question that much, because it just kind of came natural in a way. I think it probably has to do something with my upbringing because, as many of you can imagine, like I identify very strongly with the working class family identity that I actually have been growing up with. I've seen people struggling to make ends meet. I've seen people thinking twice about if they should get that banana, for instance, because it just might make the balance go off in a way that you don't want it to go. And I've also seen kids playing with me, for instance, that never had to think about these things. And when you grow up in a society like that, when you grow up in a context like that, and then you kind of make it out of that context by graduating, by moving to university, and still feeling kind of other because there's still experiences from other students that appear to have had a different path leading to university. Because when you go on excursions, for instance, when you talk to them about their financial state, these are things that just are so blatantly different. Because even though I have a bachelor's degree right now, I feel like I can contribute to society, I still have this constant feeling of anxiety and just this constant fear of being worse off than others and still falling into poverty, still falling below the poverty line. And I feel like many of the students at this university share this feeling. And that is probably one of the things that made me get into student politics, because I've just sort of felt like, because of my history, because of my upbringing, I need to be a voice for those that are basically off less fortunate, that don't have a family that can support them all the way, that don't have a financial background that might let them go on another excursion for a year, that might not have some kind of financial background so that they don't have to worry if they get a job, if they get fired. Or if we stick to the topic of feminism, for instance, if they have a financial background that makes them not worry about getting a child while studying. Because still, to this day, also for students, getting a child is one of the most severe poverty risks that you can face. And I think it is this economic plethora of struggles that probably politicize me in a way, that I just want to get across to as many people as possible, especially those that do not share these struggles, because we need those people.
But that's really amazing that you have been brave enough to speak out instead of stepping back, which also quite happens a lot. I want to ask you, I mean, there has been also a day in Germany, like the days that we have today in Iran. There was this very famous White Rose group that people were imprisoned, were killed, sentenced to death just because of a students' activism here in Germany just some decades ago. How did that develop? I mean, maybe other countries could learn from histories, which, I mean, of course, every history, every country is unique. You cannot copy paste anything. The developmental pathway is very different. But maybe you could tell us how you see the development and how it happened from White Rose days until now, that you can just very freely speak out, although it's a pressure, but legally, freely, you can speak out. And how it's challenging to maintain this, because I mean, democracy, freedom needs kinds of maintenance. You don't have it for sure forever. How do you see that?
I feel like obviously there is this historical tradition, especially in Germany, because we've, like, any child growing up in Germany is bound to learn about the Nazi regime at some point, and that is a good thing. And as you said, in many ways, there are parallels to what we're seeing in Iran right now. And it is, in fact, not just Iran or Nazi Germany, it is many of the dictatorships that we see in this world, that one of the first targets that they always come up with is women and women's society, because there was this famous quote, for instance, from Rosa Luxemburg, who basically said, you can measure the amount of freedom in a society by the amount of freedom women and non-male people actually enjoy. So the more free women are, the more free a society generally is. And if we look, for example, at historical examples like the White Rose, for instance, fighting against Nazi oppression, fighting against a rule of law that has nothing to do with law, in fact, a kind of judiciary branch that has been politicized in a way to make people victims of the Nazi ideology, the persecution of Jewish lives, the suppression of student ideologies and student thinking, of free scientific research. All these things are things that young people in Nazi Germany have grown up with. At some point, I guess Hans and Sophie Scholl just felt like they've had enough of that. They have been kind of glorified in a way. There are some dark sides to their history as well. For instance, Hans Scholl has been involved in some anti-Semitic incidents, so I'm not really interested in glorifying them, but I do see the contribution that they have had on the fight against the Nazi regime. Though today we're not fighting against struggle against the governing class, those that seek to govern us, is in some ways similar, because when you're governing a country, you basically need a populace. You need a flock of people that follow your command, that follow your ideology, that follow your politics, that support you, especially in a democratic society. What you do not want is dissent. What you definitely don't want is uprisings. So when you get those uprisings, but you're stripped of the means, like in a dictatorship, to actively suppress those uprisings, what you end up with is indirect ways of suppressing these protests that seem to be guarded by law, that seem to be well, in a way, lawfully correct, but you could still criticize the way that governments interact with these activist groups. There is this one famous example that you probably are thinking of right now. It's The Last Generation, where there's basically people blockading streets to fight for climate justice. They have been involved in a lot of media attention, especially in the Bavaria, where they have, in some instances, been sentenced to almost up to a month of preventative arrest, meaning not arrest in a way that would suggest that they have already conducted something or committed some sort of crime, but a sort of prevention of like the state trying to put a pin on it and to not have them engage in any kind of act that might threaten the state power, that might threaten the status quo that we are currently facing, especially in climate context. And it is this kind of way of suppressing activist groups that might seem very similar to Iranian people, but I guess you could still find differences there. But even if there are differences, I feel like it is very, very productive to seek for the similarities and find a common ground and fight for the same objectives. Because in many ways, if I were to talk to Iranian people, for instance, I'm pretty sure they would be able to come up with things that the regime is currently doing that do not necessarily align with the goals that we have in this Western society, for instance. Climate activism or to social inequalities. And it doesn't seem logical to me to like separate the two kinds of protests. What I'm interested in is conjoining protests, in getting this large group of people walking to the streets, rising up to fight for their rights. And I feel like the Iranian women have done a great head start, and it is just very amazing, like to see the news headlines day for day and for day, and them fighting for what they actually are entitled to, but they are not granted by their own government. And even the support in large parts of not just Germany, but Europe, South America, for instance, in Asia, and many other parts of the world. It's a global protest. It's not just an Iranian protest. And seeing that kind of mobilization is just so empowering.
You touched her. Yeah, that's very true. I really get. I mean, you're touching the point that I started with.
The quality of in Zoom, please two of the mic, like your mic and the other is better. Please use that the one that you.
Okay, then I pass this always to the others.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the point that I started with before you join us. I said this message, women life liberty or women life freedom, is a global message. It's not something that is only related to Iran as a location, is a global human development need that all of us are shouting for that in different ways. And this is very interesting when you say that. That was actually my next question to ask you. If you see yourself, your activism, or the young generation of politicians in Germany already connected to this concept and to this message, did they get it? So I already got my response. Yes, they know that this is not only for Iran. If we fight for women's life liberty, it's a global message that we are all fighting for. And this is very interesting that women in a developing country are shouting something that even developed countries are shouting for. And this is very interesting. I already got the answer of my next question. Then I move to the next one. What do you think is the most or the main challenge, or maybe there are more, but tell me, what do you think is still the main challenge in Germany when it comes to students' activism?
That's a very good question. I guess I could come up with 3 different examples, but I'm going to try to find just one. It's it's probably actually the last generation that has become the most prominent example, and maybe with a side of Fridays for Future, for instance. Though I'm not just I don't like to refer to climate activists like solely to climate activists. Because they have had a lot of attention in the past and they are doing a great job, but there's also other movements that are kind of pushed to the sidelines, even though their impact is probably even greater on the society. For instance, we see the large labor uprisings that we've had in the summer. We've seen the large protests in some of the factories, for instance, in this country. We've seen the conjoining of Fridays for Future with labor organizations like Verdi, which is something that we've never seen before and that has also politicized students. But this kind of politicizing, this mobilization, this essentially threat to the ones that seek to govern us, as I've said before, is also met with a kind of resistance. It's also met with these ways of, well, how to put it, to abnormalize them, to push them to some kind of extremist boundary, even though I'm not really a fan of talking about extremisms, especially in this kind of, in Germany, there's this very famous theorem, which is called the Hufeisen theory, where it's basically said that left extremists and right extremists are equally as bad. And I don't think I have to explain why that is such a misconception. But it is these kinds of arguments that make it hard for students, because sometimes there are these governmental positions that try to push these student protests to these sidelines and to like denormalize them. And what we need to do, especially as students that may not be involved in these kinds of collectives, but that do support these collectives, or even if we are parts of these collectives, we need to speak up against that, because what is definitely going to make those positions that we fight for, the equality that we fight for, the future of our children, if we want to have children, obviously, of course, that is something we can only fight for if we don't let the people that are in power tell us what we are allowed to say and what we are allowed to resist against. And if we let them do that, we can basically just let them do what they want in the political sphere. So it's, I guess, the biggest struggle for student activists right now is to get that high ground, to get that argumentative high ground, where they can basically say, I know that this might seem radical, but what is the point in not being radical if, when I'm not radical, there's nothing to be radical about anymore? There's not going to be a planet anymore. There's not going to be a society we can, I don't know, do marketing in. There's not going to be a society where we can live our farewell working life, where everyone gets to be the one they want to be, because our natural resources are being, well, diminished to a point where we can't regrow them, where people around the globe aren't able to, well, basically to nourish themselves, which is a harsh reality. And that is something that many student activist groups are currently fighting against. And that makes it very hard for them to find support in the society as well.
I see. I see this, but aside this, do you think there is also kinds of stigma on people who decide to speak loud, act like a politician, student, or even not a politician, rather activist? I mean, personally, talking from my own experience, I'm not an activist, I'm not a politician, whatever. I'm just working as a scientist and contribute to like cultural groups like Women, Life, Liberty in this way that I'm doing, like activities in my free time. Still, honestly, talking from my own perspective, sometimes I feel like at the working place, I don't feel comfortable that I say, okay, today evening, I'm gonna moderate a session about women, life, liberty, or something like this. It's just feeling awkward sometimes in working places. People tend to just talk about work and important things on daily life. I don't know how, I'm not a student, I'm working. I don't know how that feels to you. Do you also have that feeling that it's sometimes also a social pressure or stigma on being loud, speaking out loudly, or seeking for changes?
I guess you could go at it in two ways. Like in general, obviously, I feel like being a student is pretty hard to begin with. So it is very easy to not find the time to engage in these activist contexts. And then if you're met with criticism from the sidelines, that makes it very hard to judge yourself, to criticize yourself from the inside, to like think about yourself in a way that might not make you continue that activism. So it definitely is hard to do activism, especially in universitarian context. Even more so if you're not from an academic background, as I've said before, because you might lack the financial footing to invest time in activism, because there are obviously people that come from a working class family that need to focus on their studies, that do not have the time and resources to engage themselves in activists collectives. And that is something we as a student body need to be kind of aware of, and that we need to be in a way that we need to show solidarity for in a way, and make it easier for them to engage, and for those voices especially that have been deprivileged to actually come into these collectives and speak for themselves and not us speaking for them. But there's also this trend of young people growing, like, we've had these debates in the past where there were basically old white politicians telling the broader public that young people have just become so unpolitical, that they have just that they basically just don't care anymore. And what we see right now is that young people have grown more political than ever, because it's just impossible to grow like to stay apolitical in a time that is so full of crises. That is just like, we had the economic crises that were basically a large political happening in Germany, for instance. We had the financial crisis that struck against many markets in the whole world. We had the Corona crisis. Now we have a war in Ukraine. It's just, it's basically impossible as a young person to not grow political in some sense, because it is your own future that is affected by these crises. But many young people struggle to find an outlet to get political. So oftentimes when you're in political spheres, especially as a young person, and if you're engaged in activist and political groups, both sides will seek to pull you to them and make you not listen to the other side. But what makes protest movements very strong is that they seek to go on the streets to protest, but use that power, that mobilization in the political sphere as well, in the parliaments, to get the decisions that they want to be decided on actually passed. And like, separating these two ways to go about it is a harsh reality for many students, because they're forced to separate these two realities, because there's this stigma of activists that also engage in political spheres, that they're not full-blooded activists, that they should focus more on the street work and less on the parliaments. Otherwise, they're just brainwashed in a sense, and they're just normal washed, or whatever you want to call it. And it is also this kind of perspective that makes politics very hard for young people, I guess, because that is a very common trend in young political spheres, especially.
All the time trying to make use of all the microphones, but doesn't work. Yeah, okay, so again, we have also challenges in Germany. We are not done anywhere on this earth. And yeah, of course, it's not as harsh as it's happening in Iran. but still some stigma, some difficulties, and even big challenges to be an activist and to speak out for your need. I'm gonna restart with Nina and asking her, okay, Nina is a student at the University of Bonn. She's coming originally from Ukraine, and she started the activism for Ukraine just by the beginning of the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. I'm not gonna explain more. I want to ask you, how did students' activism started for you?
Thank you very much for this question. I think most of you saw the video about Ukraine at the beginning, and they reflect the events of Revolution of Dignity 2013, 2014. And there was one picture showing the Independence Square and a lot of lights. It was in the New Year's Eve, and I was there. And you, okay. I was there with the small light, so you will not see me. Okay.
Joined us later.
Нам воля дорожче золото, наше слово б'є краще молото. Гейти – це велика сила, гейти – це є Україна.
Yes, so at that time I was a student, very young, very immature, I would say. I didn't participate much, which I regret now, but this is what it is. So when the full-scale invasion started in 2022, I think I was active from the first moments. I have been to demonstration in every city that was organized in NRW. I was going to Cologne, to Düsseldorf, to Dortmund. Since it was my semester free time, I could spend every day almost. I would go to, at the beginning, of course, it was really chaotic, sporadic help. I would go to train station when the first people arrived to translate. I would go to sort and pack humanitarian aid, or to, when a bit more organized help was provided by Caritas or German Red Cross, I would just come there to help. Head of our association was in the occupied town. When she returned back, we decided that something should be done. Let's organize something more. And just as a group of students, we did our first donation campaign in May 2022, which was rather hard as just individuals. All the bureaucratic moments were quite hard for us, but it was successful, and I think we found each other. We found the support to each other, and we decided to organize our group. Actually, next week on the 6th of October, will be 1 year old. Our organization student group, unibond.ua. I was among the co-founders, yeah, since that time, I think we did already so many successful events, with the major one doing donation campaigns to collect money for different activities, helping rather smaller organizations in Ukraine, our friends, that would provide direct targeted help to the people in Ukraine. And I'm very proud as well that we're not only Ukrainians, we have international students, and we also have not only students. So we are really welcome to everyone who is ready to help and share our goals.
Thanks, Nina. This is amazing. I mean, this is that has been a crazy year. Started in September, the uprising in Iran, and then right after the invasion in October. And then at some point I was also joining almost every protest with also Ukrainian people. We sometimes just bounded the flags together to show how this all is related to each other. I mean, we heard quite often on the news that Islamic Republic is delivering weapons to Russia to bomb at Ukraine. And that was, from one side, a shame that this is the government which is ruling my country, not my people. And from the other side, that was, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any question or comment, please save it and we will have time for that. Yeah, sure. Yeah. That was also part of this common goal that we are all the time talking about, common pain, common goal. And that's very important when it comes to talking about solidarity, how we build up support and solidarity. But before we come to this, I know you invested quite a lot, I mean, time and energy to build up such a thing which raises up also solidarity from international community. In the beginning, everybody was kind of traumatized, and of course there was not that much support out there. this similar feeling that the Iranian people had. But before I come to this point, I wanted to ask you, like we saw this landscape of different times in Ukraine. I mean, how do you think historically students in Ukraine contribute to influential messages or changes in the society, like something which is led from academic or university people to the society and contributes to democracy and freedom in Ukraine?
Yeah, so you saw one of the really important events in our history, but I would say that our independence started because of the students. One of the biggest demonstrations on the Independence Square, which was actually named Independence Square after this demonstration, was in 1990 in October. It was around 2 weeks when Ukrainian Student Union got on the strike. They have different, they were protesting and demanding different things. Among of them was that the government would not sign new union treaty, which would basically transform the collapse in Soviet Union in the Union of Soviet Republic. And from here, they had a hunger strike, and their protest was successful, I think. And 1 year afterwards, Ukraine got independence. Then we had important also protest or demonstration or campaign, or like the series of events of demonstrations in 2004, 2005, which is commonly named Orange Revolution. At the time I was quite little, but I remember when my mother was saying we have to pack some food and send it to the demonstrators because they were staying there and it was cold as well. Here people raised up, and one of them many students who were against the electoral fraud. We wanted to have the president that we elected, not that was, it was like a lot of corruption and mass fraud was detected. People went on the streets to show it, and we achieved what we wanted. And the last one, Revolution of Dignity, it's also started, it was started from the students when they went on the streets on the Independence Square to protest against the decision of the current government not to sign the and not to support the already the way that was European way that was accepted by many people. At the beginning, it was a peace demonstration, and when the students were beaten, the society raised. I was reading one book of one of our famous authors, where he's saying, when our kids were beaten, we understood there is no way back. And I think afterwards, this is what catalyzed. The students came first, and then the whole society stood for them. So you can definitely see in our history how the student movement was very important in many political changes.
Thanks. This is really important and amazing. I mean, although Matia just explained how students' activism became a crime in Iran, still is a crime. She was herself imprisoned for student activity, not only banned from higher education, but also imprisoned for that. But despite that, still students in Iran at the universities are leading campaigns and some influential changes through the society. They still deliver statements and like build up these hashtags that goes viral through social media, and then everybody says the same, which was first delivered from one of the leading universities. So yeah, of course, I mean, still is a challenge, it's difficult. Everybody who is there is, even from Germany, to all over the world, Iran, Ukraine, everywhere, is still not a safe way of living as a student to be active and to be loud, but still is a leading way, and it's very important. I want to ask you, Nina, do you think your mission meets? I mean, I think your answer is clear, but I want to ask more about how your mission meets the mission of Steve and Mattia, and how we could support you.
Yes, definitely. I see the parallels. I mean, you saw in the video freedom. This is the same what the women in Iran stand for, not only women. I think this is such an important thing that we all need: liberty, freedom, freedom of speech, freedom to elect the government we want. These are the things that all unite us, and as you said, we stand together. I was also at the demonstrations for women, life, liberty, because I think this is so important to stay together, to be connected, because together only together we can really achieve so many things that alone is not possible. And talking about Steve, I heard some really important messages that I would like people also in Ukraine and students in Ukraine to realize. Being a politician or being an activist should not be seen as something bad. We are the ones who are deciding the future. We are the ones who are defining the future. And it depends on us. Whom are we voting for? Are we getting informed, or we just put whatever, or we don't come for election? We need to take this responsibility on ourselves and to represent our interest. And if we stay silent, then we will get oppressed, I suppose.
I really like how this discussion is going, because what you just said as a last sentence was my question next to Steve. We are living in Germany in a democratic system. We have democracy, we have liberty. How we can use the democratic system of Germany here and the politicians to support this common goal?
Me as a person in the system, or the system in general? Yeah. I think it probably needs a mixture of both what you just said, like the political sphere, obviously, because we need, like, obviously we live in a democratically organized society, which is a good thing, where people join parliaments to make these decisions. So we need allies in these kinds of positions, and some parties have stronger ties, for instance, with the Ukrainian people. We have parties that support the Iranians, the Iranian struggle, the Ukrainian struggle, and we have parties that don't support these struggles. There is one very prominent party that I would not opt to vote if I wanted to support these kinds of fights, these kinds of revolutions. And there's also parties that I would be obliged to vote if I want to support them. But politics alone will not solve any of these crises. We've seen that economic entanglements, that government interests, those sometimes or in the interest of the people at large, or at least masked to be in the interest of people at large, have hindered governments to actually do what they've promised, to actually cut the ties with regimes that suppress their own people, for instance. We've seen that with the current government, for instance, desperately trying to find some kind of wiggle room with the Iranian government, for instance. They're still getting oil from indirect means They're not getting oil from the Iranian government directly, but they're getting oil from Saudi Arabia, for instance, which is still trading with Iran and thus getting Iranian oil as well. They're masking this to pretend they're supporting the Iranian struggle, but effectively they're undermining the attempts to revolutionize because they're still engaging in economic affairs with the regime. It's the same with the Ukrainian people. We've seen a long political debate about whether to import Russian oil. We have still not come to a very definite grasp of whether we want to continue trade relations with Russia or whether we don't, even though obviously none of the politicians making these decisions has engaged in long conversations with the victims of the Russian invasion, the Ukrainians. It's always been decisions of German politicians sitting around a table thinking of what's best for the German people, not so much about the Ukrainian people. And I think that is precisely where activism comes into play, because activism has the power to also highlight political decisions, to highlight political interests that might not seem beneficial at first, or that might not seem to be the government's intentions, but that the people at large, that even though they might collide with economic interests, with capitalist interests, that they are still pronounced. And that is something that political persons many times don't do because they have this kind of power and they want to keep that power. So I guess it needs both kinds of perspectives. Activism that's engaged in pushing politicians to support the protests that are happening right now, but it also needs the politicians actually doing the decisions or acting on the decisions that they have been voted for.
Thanks. It highlights again like how important is our non-politicians being active, and just activism as a student, as staff, as normal citizens, and not leaving things on politicians actively every day, all the time, by elections, also by everyday campaigns. And from the other side, I would say the diversity, keeping the politicians as diverse as possible, not leaving them just like in minority of politicians having the power only in hand, pushing always the diversity through politicians and political parties. That's what I could wrap up out of this. So I'm gonna get back to Mattia with my almost last wrap-up question. I want to ask you, how do you think the people or the students in Iran who you are connected with, who you are still, I know you still work with them somehow, how do you think they want us to support them, and what we could do for them, what they see as a real support when it comes to their point of view? And I want to also, at the end, ask you if you would like to read us a relevant paragraph of your book to this topic, because I mean, now I want to also say Mattia wrote a book once she was in prison. She was writing letters. The title of the book is Forbidden Letters. She was writing letters to her lover, currently her husband. And that was her thoughts about very different things: freedom, democracy, women's in prison, how she was experiencing this. She wrote a book, and now the book is also translated in English. There are copies of the book. If you want to buy them, please feel free at the end of the panel to buy them, or to just take a look inside the book. And it would be very nice if you have some highlighting paragraphs of the book to read for us. And also, please don't forget to respond my question: what will be a support from us to your community?
The biggest treasure for Islamic regime is propaganda. And every year, Islamic regime sent their officer to best university in the world with full scholarship. And they make some research, fake research, and show the fake face of Iran. As you mentioned about the women who go to university more than other country, without paying attention to the just 13% of women can participate in economic. So it's very important to the university all over the world try to ban this kind of person, this kind of professor or students that come here and enjoy from freedom academia. But when in Iran, many professors and students got fired just because of critical thinking or their beliefs or their religion, and try to support them instead of support the propaganda regime in university, support the students and professors who can't continue their education or teaching in Iran. And it's, I think it's the biggest problem in university now. And about book, yes, I wrote some daily letter on napkins and put them on the handmade dolls and send out. And it's now this book. I try to describe prison environment, prison situation, and my friend, women who were murder, drug trafficker, or many other women who, if I were not in prison, I couldn't meet them and listen to their history and the story. And I wrote some of their story in my book, and now it's a book. 10 years ago, it was just napkins. Yes, when I was in prison, I wrote a letter for a student and say, you can change. And because we have one national day for students. And that day I wrote a letter. And because of that, I in charge 6 months more in prison. And I explain about it somewhere in book. I went to court to be briefed on my new charge today. I felt so proud when the interrogator began talking angry about my new note. Then he read my most recent note about a student's day aloud. He nearly blew up his top. In fact, their anger makes me feel happy, except for the new sentences, which could be really frustrating. I'm not sure for how many more days I will be banned from phone and visits. And today, while having lunch, we heard someone scream from corridor. See the worms in the things. Look, they are everywhere. Apparently, the body of a prisoner called Zahra, who hates water and taking a shower, is covered with worms. Finally, everyone rushed to take her to the bathroom and blah, blah, blah. There's some things like a scary movie, sometimes lovely movie, sometimes it's a brave woman, sometimes I afraid. And yeah, it's me without any filter. Yeah.
Thanks, Matia. I still didn't have the chance to have the book in hand, like reading it, but I think I will be the first one to buy the book. And I mean, that's a pity. I was at the same time in the same country. I was never active as a student in Iran. I never dared to. I was studying hard to save myself, and I found my way outside the country, immigrated, but I suffered the same problems, the same pain inside the country, but I was not brave enough. And there are very different ways to deal with this. And I decided to move out, save myself, and continue. Matia went through a very tough way of imprisoning, getting banned of higher education. And now, after all, she's out and she's still continuing to support the community inside Iran. So I think this will be a lot of I would learn a lot from this book to see how this was happening to you while I was going to my classes in Iran. And I think this is something to learn out of it. I would like to thank everyone and of course the panelists. I think we really had a very amazing, at least for myself, amazing discussion and very interesting. We still have some time to ask some questions and deliver comments. And don't be shy, speak out. And also, if you do not like to comment right now, you can also write us on Instagram, like direct. We will always learn and enjoy from your feedback. And there are some drinks and snacks over there. Please feel free to take them while we are having the Q&A. We were supposed to have a proper networking, but unfortunately from, I would say, just a bad management of the hall, they didn't tell us once we booked the hall that it's not allowed to have real snacks and alcoholic drinks. We even ordered beer and stuff, but then they told us it's not allowed to have alcoholic drinks, also snacks. So we had to prepare some packed stuff and some simple soft drinks. I apologize, but it was not really what we wanted. But still, you can take them, enjoy, and now stage is yours. If anyone has any question, please just raise a hand. I will pass the microphone to you. It should not be a question, could be also just a comment or feedback. And yeah, of course, there will be also some questions from the online audiences. What? No, I can. Oh, okay, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, we start with the first online question. I have just a little thought experiment. What do you think would happen if the US and other countries would drop the sanctions, but only for women for the next 20 years? Meaning that only women could trade internationally for the next 20 years. I think this is a question to Matia because these sanctions are about Iran. Of course, this is a crazy thought and very discriminatory towards men. On the other side, if the workforce only contains 13% of women in Iran, I wonder what this drop of sanctions would do to the situation of women in Iran and to the women life freedom movement. This is now just a little out of the box thinking. There are certainly a lot of objections to make. I mean, I think this is something what one could call as positive discrimination, but I would leave the question to Matia.
You mentioned positive discrimination.
It was my interpretation of the question. He meant, what if US stops sanctions, but only on Iranian women? Would that help, for example, economic countries?
Yeah, but this kind of target sanction is impossible. If you know a little about economics, you can find it's impossible. But about sanction, yes, it has affected on the economic people in Iran, not the government, because the government can find some way for escape from sanction. The government and their official have a best quality life in Iran, and the sanction is for the sanctions are just for ordinary people. Because if our family have problem with healthy problem, can't have enough drug or some medicine or something like that. And on the other hand, there is a many weapon during the women life freedom. England, United States, or some other country export some kind of weapon to Iran. How we can say it's a sanction? No, there is no sanction against Islamic regime. There's some sanction against people, because the people who are near to leadership, Khamenei, can easily go to other country for healthcare, medicine, or something like that, and can have a trade. IRGC have a trade with all the countries. That's why I see sanction is just it's a game for governments. Really, sanction is that the Khamenei and their family and their government can't go to New York. Raisi can't go to the New York for talking about democracy in Iran. It's real sanction. But they gave visa to Raisi as a murderer and many other in his cabinet. But about visa to students, there's a many problem. No, they can't give visa to students. But about the government, yes, it's okay. That's why I think it's just a game sanctioned. It's just a game.
Any question from people in the hall? Or even some comments, feedback? Okay, there is one there.
Yeah, I'm going to pick.
Hey, hello. My question is about, you mentioned about safety of a student activism, and it's been a fear, especially through last year, about Iran, when you want to do anything, like even when you want to go to street or talk about it, or through demonstrations, many students are really afraid, or even the families, and they're like, no, please don't go. They're gonna be a massive problem for you. And we all know that, yes, they might threaten us, or they might be some dangers. But I just wanted to ask you, like, as we are living in Deutschland, in Germany, and everybody says that here everything is safe and you have the freedom, but still the fear is there, and especially for the family who are still in Iran. And I just wanted to ask, do you have any suggestion or anything to say about this area? I would love to hear your word. Thank you.
Is it too low, or can I use this still? Maria. I think it's okay. I'm gonna use this. I mean, this is a very personal question. This is a very personal question and personal decision. Just like what I said, I decided to stick to my education and save my life after I succeeded to some point, and then immigration. Mattia decided to stay there and fight until she was out or she was banned. These decisions are very complicated and different and depends on capacity of people. I would never expect anyone to do this or that. This is what we are talking about, liberty, and particularly private or individual freedoms. I mean, there is no blame on people who are afraid of acting. This is my personal opinion. I'm not talking as an expert. I'm just answering from my personal opinion. I would also to add that everything that we mentioned here are also personal opinion. What, for example, Mattia just said about sanctions is her point of view. There are also other points of view about sanctions, why they should be or they should not be. But yes, I mean, that's what I could say. Do you have other points responding to that question? No. So I think that's it. It's really a personal decision depending on the capacity of people. Please don't be shy. Take some soft drinks. At least it turns off some thirsty, and yeah, there are some packed snacks to take with. Sure, Matthew. Do you have something?
Yes, it can be a personal decision, but we as a human have some duty about the society. That's why if somebody can enjoy life without paying attention to other people, so help yourself. If you can enjoy, it's good for you. You as an example. But most of the people can enjoy by herself or their self just because the happiness is the feeling that belong to the society, not just in the person. All the time we have to sacrifice some things for giving something else. Yes, somebody like me sacrificed some part of our life, or how all our life. Because, for example, now I miss for my mom, but I can't back to Iran, directly go to prison. But I think we have some duty in front of society. And all of us have to do some part of that. If all of us think it's a personal decision, so maybe Germany wasn't like now. Germany is now the freedom country because of the society, and many of people, not most of the people or all of the people, but many people want make a democracy. So that's why I think it's not just personal decision.
I also have a comment from my for your question, I also have a comment from my personal point of view and experience. At a point in the Iran's protest, I decided to decrease my relationship with those friends who are so scared, and like decrease my motivation, and like going to Iran, like blaming me that don't you want to meet your family, meet your mother, and increase my relationship with those people who cares about this kind of stuff and encourage me. That's for me helped from personal matters. Just was
So yeah, I mean, it's famous psychology advice. If you feel pain, find people who have similar pains like you, or if you have a trauma, find people who could understand your trauma from personal experiences. Of course, this is a way of living something that is not anymore, you cannot tolerate it anymore, towards something new, and then build up your new world with people who could understand you. Of course, this is another approach, and I really like that we have different approaches to the same problem. And I like that we had even more than one answer to this question. Sure.
I do it with my device. I have a question. How does your political activism looks like in practice? Like you already shared your thoughts about your motivation to start with that, but what are, for example, the platforms you bring out your thoughts, and what could be like your hints to start with that and to find maybe an organization, a group of people, to build like a network, and yeah, to make it just for example, to this podium where you are, or even bigger, like how to find this platform to bring out your thoughts and your ideas. Thank you.
Is it the question to everyone of the panels? Okay, I respond and then pass the microphone to the others. I think we got the opportunity to use online and also on-site platforms. Online, people have Facebook and Instagram and other platforms to share the ideas, and also on-site preparing these events. This is the third, I think the third big event that Women Life Liberty, for example, is organizing. The first one was the campus rally at the University of Bonn, which we were really walking through the university campus from Poppelsdorf to the city center. Second one was the International Women's Day, which was really the single event of International Women's Day in the whole university. That was already amazing. That the university itself didn't organize a special event for women for Women's Day, but we did. And now is the third one, the panel discussion. If we have the capacity and people, we of course have also the budget and the structure to do more. Please join us. I mean, we already agreed that it's an inclusive message and inclusive mission to work on. So please don't feel shy, and don't think if you are not from Iran, you don't have anything to do with us. We are looking all the time actively for active members and contributors who could help us to have more often events. And then this is the first way to approach it. And the other way is another group we are closely working with is Frauen leben Freiheit, more doing German oriented in the really city with a more broad target group, also all in German. There was a need somehow to complement each other, one part more internationally oriented and also at the university where we all are students and actively working, and the other side in the city, which more broad target group could be included. So they are also very active. Yesterday was another event at the City Hall of the Bonn with a mayor of Bonn also in there. So these are the ways, reaching out politicians, reaching out the general public, and whatever we can do to fight this propaganda that Mattia just mentioned. This is the only way we have. But let's see what ways have the others.
I think it was rather about the political activism. I would not consider our group as political. Even though we had once panel discussion with politicians from different parties from Germany about next steps and how they see the support and cooperation with Ukraine. Yes, as a cultural group, as a student group, we really try to engage international students to talk to us, to support us, to come and learn our traditions. Even though we see that the demand from Ukrainians who are here is really high for our activities, because these people, I think, need communication and also some support. So we are trying to also work with Ukrainian youth, motivate them to be active. Yes, about raising our voices, I think the most important here was the demonstrations that we organized with different also active groups, with Ukrainian groups in Bonn or Cologne. Recently at the Independence Day in August, we were given a speech on behalf of our group, saying what we do, who are we, and how to approach us. So I think there are many different platforms where we can raise our voices, and this cooperation I find really, really great. As we hear different voices, we have different struggles, different challenges. But again, we saw how many parallels we can draw here.
I think it kind of depends. I know that's a pretty lame answer. But I think it kind of depends on if you're just interested in the activist politics or if you're actually interested in joining an activist group, because you technically can also have activist politics in rather political groups where they're joining demonstrations, for instance, where they're calling for solidarity, where they're engaging with collectives, for instance. That happens in political parties even, though it's kind of party washed in a sense. So it's not as radical, it's not as listen to me, it's a bit more establishment like. So if you want the real deal, I would recommend joining a demonstration and just taking part in that, because oftentimes the ones organizing these demonstrations are also part of that demonstration, logically. And activist groups are notoriously ill-staffed. So there's always a lack of people supporting the collective. There's always some kind of position that is not filled yet. So you're gonna find something that you can actually take part in that collective. You just need to talk to them, or you need to make yourself heard and have them talk to you. But depending on the collective, I feel like the very good activist groups are the ones that make it easy for outsiders to actually get into this closed circle, and that are very, that don't have that many hierarchies, if you know what I mean. So that there's basically this base group where anyone could participate potentially, and where ideas spring from. And those activist groups exist in Bonn as well. So if you want to get in contact with some, also like have a look and see what might be of interest to you. So getting in contact with those groups shouldn't be.
I think there is one more question to Ukraine and Iran. I would ask first Nina, what gives you hope to continue this struggle?
That's a really good question. I think what motivates me is my family. My family who is in Ukraine, who is hiding almost every day. My mother, who is a teacher. I have no clue how she's managing those little kids to bring to the cellar, sit with them, calm them down, and go back and try to continue the learning process. My also motivation, my uncle who is in the army, for whom I'm praying every day that he will be safe. I think what I'm doing drives me so much because I want to share to them. I want them to feel they are not alone. I'm not saying I'm fighting here, I'm not. My uncle, my cousin, so many other people, they're really fighting, and they are supporters. If they see that we just enjoy beautiful life in Germany, I think the fight will stop. We are all united for that. We're here and they are at the front line. What brings me hope? I think this, I believe that we will win. I don't know when it will happen. Nobody knows, nobody can say. But I think if we stop fighting, we will not exist.
That's it. Yeah. Being still alive gives you hope. As long as we are still living the life, we are still possible to change something. I mean, we are still capable as long as we live the life. That's my comment to what you said. So with that, I would like to close and still give you time to please, these drinks should be drunk, otherwise be paid for what. Yeah, just enjoy the time. Feel free to stay, chat with each other, meet the panelists, ask your questions in person. Take a look inside the book of Mattia. If you want to buy them, please feel free to support her with that. And thanks again for joining us today evening and spending your Friday evening with us. Amazing. Thank you.
What about